Ultimately, people, if you give them the opportunity, if you jazz people on all of their levels, they can do absolutely incredible things. And I'm going to have the joy of telling you that in story form today. I'm not giving you any lectures on leadership. I'm going to just tell you some stories about some of these people who have changed the world, and hopefully you'll draw conclusions for yourself. Now, the first story challenges one basic idea, which is that we all have little voices inside our heads. How many of you have little voices inside your heads that talk to you all the time? Okay, we have to have a deal here. You got to tell Doug, the storyteller, the truth, or I'm going to bring you up on stage, okay? So let's ask that again. How many of you have little voices that talk to you all the time? There you go, most of you. There's still a few liars out there. And now I know who you are, so you're in trouble. Everybody I know has voices that talk to us all the time, and those voices have a huge influence on the outcome of what we do. And the guy we saw in the opening video there, Henry Ford, Henry had a few issues himself, but he was a smart guy, and he said this one day. He said, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And what he was saying was, those little voices predetermine the outcome of what we do. They have a huge influence on us. Now, another pretty smart guy, most of you heard him, his name was Einstein. Einstein said something about change, and he said we can't solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. And Einstein, better than anyone alive on Earth at the time, understood that the entire universe is in a constant state of change. Nothing stays the same. Many of you know that every cell in our body changes every 7 years. So I'm standing here today, not a single cell that's here today in this room on this stage was here 7 years ago in this body, which blows me away. And no one's figured out how to just keep the good ones and get rid of the bad ones, unfortunately, but I'm sure there are people in a lab working on that. Ask the question, think back 7 years. All right, so summer 2002, what's the landmark? 9/11 was in the fall before that. We've all kind of come through that. What were you doing? What's changed in your life outside of every single thing in your body? In your personal life, in your work life? Because everything physical has changed. What else has changed? And for some people, the answer is not much. And part of that for some people is that they're resistant to change. It's a natural human reaction to put our feet in sometimes when things are changing because it gets us into areas outside our comfort zone. Einstein understood that when dealing with people. And my favorite definition of insanity is this one, which you may have heard before: doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. And how many people do you know who are like that? So I'd like to tell you a story to put into context the power of that little idea and the power of the little voices inside our heads. And here's the story. It's set from 1954. Okay? So in 1954, in the world of track and field, it was believed that it was impossible for a human being to run a mile in under 4 minutes. How many of you have ever run a mile in under 4 minutes, just out of curiosity? Okay, we're all in this boat together. Excellent. Many medical practitioners back then actually thought that the pace required to run a sub-4 minute mile would cause the human heart to explode in the rib cage. One person who didn't believe it was a doctor and medical student and runner at Oxford named Roger Bannister. How many of you know the name Roger Bannister? So quite a few of you. Bannister had been trying to break 4 minutes for years, never got his time below 4:03, and by this little definition and my version of the story, woke up one day and went, I'm insane. Yeah, I should have done that with a British accent. Oh, bloody hell, I'm insane. Because he realized he was doing what every other runner in the world who was trying to break 4 minutes was doing. He was going out to the track every day and trying to run a little bit harder and faster and go, beat 4 minutes. It wasn't working. So he had a big idea. And he put that big idea, that aha, to the test at an otherwise ordinary track meet on May the 6th, 1954. And I'm going to show you the race because there's lots of lessons we can all learn from it. Two things we need to know before watching. Number one, there are 3 runners are going to break away from everybody else. Their names are Chris Brasher, Roger Bannister, Chris Chataway, in that order. So Chris, Roger, Chris. They're running as a team. They're not running against each other. And the voice you'll hear in addition to mine is that of Sir Roger Bannister himself. So let's have a look at this amazing 4 minutes out of sports history.
As the gun fired, Chris Brasher went into the lead and I slipped in effortlessly behind him, feeling tremendously full of running. My legs seemed to meet no resistance at all, almost as if impelled by an unknown force. We seemed to be going so slowly. Impatiently I shouted faster, but Brasher kept his head and didn't change the pace.
So while the record books show that the barrier was broken by a single runner, Bannister, it wasn't. It was broken by a team. For years, as I say, he tried to do it alone and never got below 4:03. So his big aha was, hold on, why don't I bring my teammates to run with me rather than against me? So he went out and found two equally dedicated runners in Brasher and Chataway, and a tough new coach named Franz Stempfel, whose name you'll hear. It was as a team that they literally set out to change the world's view of what a human being was capable of doing.
The faint line of the finishing tape stood ahead as a haven of peace after the struggle. I leapt at the tape, like a man taking his last spring to save himself from the chasm that threatens to engulf him. My effort was over, and I collapsed almost unconscious with an arm on either side of me. It was only then that the real pain overtook me. I knew I had done it before I even heard the time. I felt as if I was too close to have failed.
On May 6, 1954, Chris Brasher, Roger Bannister, and Chris Chataway did break the impossible barrier. They ran the mile in 3:59.4, 0.6 of a second under impossible. In doing that, they showed every other runner in the world that it could be done. They changed the game from can it be done to how fast can it be done. A couple of weeks later, an Australian named John Landy, who'd been trying to do this for years, suddenly did it in 3:58. Bannister raced him a couple of months later, did it in 3:57.3. And the barriers continue to fall in the years since, and today stands at 3:43.13. So what's the point for all of us in business? And what can any of us learn from that? Well, number one, I think, as Henry Ford said, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. As soon as Bannister broke that mental barrier for everyone, it changed the game. And I asked the question, what are your mental barriers? What are the things about yourself or the way you operate that you think are impossible? Because dealing with those, pounding your way through them, is the most important step to doing things, as I say, to reaching your full potential, to operating at all 5 of your levels. Secondly, for those of you who have teams that work with and for you, I thought this was a great example of clarity of vision. You know, we all have visions, and visions are important. Here's a vision. 4 minutes and over, we fail. Anything under 4 minutes, we win. Everyone clear? There was no doubt about what they had to do to win. And there was no doubt about what everyone's role in the team was. Chris Brasher get us halfway, Chataway get us 3/4, Roger, you're the closer. Everyone clear on what their roles were. Now, despite that, there was an interesting team dynamic. Bannister challenged Brasher through the first 2 laps, yelling, faster, faster, and Brasher refused to speed up. I would put to you that the leader on the team was not Roger Bannister, who was the hierarchical leader. It was Chris Brasher, because I watched that race. I've seen this race 100 times. I would put to you that if they had gone any faster in the first 2 laps, there is no chance Bannister would have had the legs to make it in under 4 minutes. He barely made it. Brasher had exactly the right pace, and he trusted his gut to say no to his hierarchical boss, to risk going back into the locker room if he had been wrong and they had come in at 4:05, dealing with his comrades. But they had created a team environment where he could make that decision, and Bannister said, you know what, I'm just going to go with it. And that is the glue that holds great teams together. The accountability of Brasher for doing it, and the team dynamic for allowing him to. And finally, they showed something that I think we all know, that we forget sometimes in the heat of battle, which is that nothing great was ever done alone. If you want to do something, you have to surround yourself with a great team. And the good news is, you've already figured that out, and the team's here today. In a lot of organizations, that's not the clarity. There is no clarity around that. It's about my career, what kind of advancement can I get, what can I do for me, rather than what kind of success can we have as we. And I think Bannister, with just 3 people, was a great little microcosm in history to show that. Now, question, how many of you have people who report to you? Yes, that's perfect. Question to you, and how many of you have kids? Perfect. How many of you have spouses or girlfriends, boyfriends, partners? All right. I would put to you a simple idea. If you don't know what the mental barriers are inside the heads of the people who work for you, the people who are your teammates at whatever hierarchical level they are, of your spouse or your teenage kids who are driving you insane, it's impossible to help them as a leader to get beyond where they are right now. So we're going to do a fun little thing after the break, which is why I want you to sit together. But understanding those mental barriers is the first step in getting there.